your Chargers linebacker, Deion Henley, and you're tuning in with Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Ryan Dyrud here with you from the LA Football Network. Today's show, of course, is being brought to you by BetOnline, AG1, Aura, Mint Mobile, and Rock Solid Sports Memorabilia. If this is your first time tuning in to the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein is on vacation this weekend, so Chargers Unleashed threw up the bat signal, and thankfully, our very own Ryan Dyrud was kind enough to answer the call. How are you, sir?
What's up, my brother? Always a pleasure. And Dan obviously is the puppet master behind the scenes. So as you can see, we weren't even able to update the banner here. So I'm Dan today. Don't have the hair, but I'll play the part as best I can. But always good, Jake, hanging out with you and excited to talk some Bolt football.
Yeah. So obviously the best part about this weekend as it relates to Chargers fans in some circumstances is that the Chargers aren't playing. So they don't have to call the cardiologist as I do, as we have had to do that for the last 4 weeks with all of these close wins. We could sit back, take a breather, watch the rest of the NFL games play out. But what we kind of wanted to do today is obviously with the first 4 games in the books, take the temperature of what has this first quarter of the season been for the Chargers? How would you assess it? What needs to improve? We obviously have a bunch of storylines that we kind of want to go over with the J.C. Jackson trade earlier this week. Possibly a few guys returning from injury after the bye week. We'll see what transpires there. So in general, wanted to kind of put the pulse on the fan base, let you guys answer, ask a bunch of the questions in terms of what's on your mind now that we are currently sitting in the Chargers bye week. So what do we want to start with, Ryan?
Great. Well, first off, I love that you said that like a bye week is like a relaxing. It's so funny growing up, it's like when you're a kid, you're like, my team's not playing this week. It's such a bummer. And as you get older, and especially since we cover the teams, it's like, nice. This is a relaxing weekend. I can just, bet on teams that I don't care about and not have heart attacks. So, no, I feel like up to you, but I feel like it might be a good starting point to start with J.C. Jackson and then get to the actual who's on the team. But that might be a good starting point.
Yeah. Interesting situation that has transpired with J.C. Jackson, obviously with this year. It's been an unfortunate roller coaster since he had become part of this team last year. And it went from, you have to go all the way back to training camp last year when he had the out of nowhere surgery for removing the bone spurt in his foot. That took him out of training camp for a few weeks. And then he was ramping back up early part of the season. Obviously, the play that everybody was expecting to see from him, because in training camp that year, he looked like the J.C. Jackson from New England. And then when it came to the beginning of last year, it just wasn't happening. It wasn't there. To everybody else's eyes, he was playing out of his normal position that he was playing in New England. He couldn't fully grasp the playbook. And then right when Brandon Staley had tailored it to more of a man defense is when he went down with his knee injury. And obviously we have been covering it plenty on this show during the offseason in terms of his rehab, in terms of getting back to playing. And then, nice week 1 gift. J.C. Jackson is tasked with covering Tyreek Hill, and we all know how that ended up playing out.
Welcome back.
Yes, exactly. And then you see just unfortunately, just the play didn't end up improving. And then a couple weeks ago, things kind of came to a head where J.C. Jackson was a surprising inactive. Come to find out later that there was an arrest warrant for him missing a court date. And then last week, he was active, but did not record a single defensive snap. So essentially, for the past 2 weeks, he had been a healthy inactive. Regardless of what the news reports said or not, he was a healthy inactive because he did not play the last 2 weeks. And then ultimately we find out earlier this week that the Chargers execute a trade with the New England Patriots, sending him back to New England for the exchange of a 7th and a 6th round pick swap in 2025. The Chargers get out from underneath the contract that they gave him, at least the back end of that contract. And what do you say in that circumstance? Unfortunately, it was a trade that did not end up materializing for the Chargers for a multitude of different reasons, really. And then the Chargers go out and they sign Essang Bassey, who basically had spent some time with the Chargers. This is going to be his second stint with them. He is more of a nickel corner to try to shore up that spot. I personally don't believe the Chargers are actually done at that position, because when you take a guy like J.C. Jackson and his measurables, regardless of what his play has been like with the team thus far, that's a big body guy. And the Chargers in general, outside of Mike Davis right now, are very small at corner. They're very small at corner. So I'm not sure if the Chargers are going to plan on going after anybody else during the bye week. Maybe it comes closer to the trade deadline. But just in general, forward thinking, corner is now going to be a huge priority for this team and building it in the offseason. But Ryan wanted to get your thoughts, and obviously we'll get some thoughts from everybody here in the chat. How did you see it when that news broke earlier this week?
Yeah, it was unfortunate. Obviously, it was such a high of high when he signed, because it's like the Chargers, I think, pre-Staley, didn't always spend a lot in free agency. They'd splash here and there, but he's usually kind of like mid-range free agents. And then back-to-back years, it's like they get Corey Linsley, make him the highest paid center. They go trade for Khalil Mack, and then they get the highest paid corner in JC Jackson. So it was like a shift in kind of roster construction. And yeah, it just didn't work out. Like it started off, like you said, in training camp looking good. And then as soon as the game starts, it's like, all right, what's going on here? And as you mentioned, they kind of shifted the defense to cater to him, and then he gets hurt. And for whatever reason, it just deteriorated from there, even this year after fighting to come back. And, sometimes, as we all know that are in the workforce, it's just sometimes just not a fit. Like you can have a job where you think it's going to be great, and the job culture might be fine, you're fine, but for whatever reason, there's just not a synergy there. And that's what it felt like. So, I think it's unfortunate, but what I was pleased about is that the Chargers recognized, like, hey, this didn't work out. Let's just take care of it now, instead of having it linger, having him be a question mark scratch, having the media and fans wondering what's going on. Like, let's just move on, wash our hands of it, say it wasn't good for either of us, and make a decision quick. So I think that was the best case for both parties. And now JC can go back and hopefully, have a good career with the Patriots, not against the Chargers, hopefully, when they play. It's always interesting when you trade in conference, but at least it wasn't in division. But yeah, I think it was good that they just moved on. Now to the questions about, will they make another move? I know Bryce Callahan's a name everyone keeps throwing out there in familiarity. It's interesting that they went and signed a Bassi, and that happened obviously right after this move. And I'll ask you this, Jake. Like, I don't think they would maybe do another move, because I think it would have happened already. Like, why would you wait any longer?
Right.
Especially when you signed Bassi, that kind of seemed like that was the move. And I'm interested why, Bryce Callahan maybe isn't. I mean, he obviously played here. He knows Staley well. He fits in the system. He's out there. I don't know if he doesn't want to come. I don't want to start any rumors, but maybe he didn't want to come back. Maybe he's chilling, enjoying his time, not playing. I don't know, but it is interesting that that's a guy that they haven't brought back. But do you see them making any more moves? Because I feel like they've done it.
Probably not this week. I was actually thinking in my head that an intriguing name for them to target was actually Greedy Williams, because he fit that bigger bodied corner, faster at 4.3 speed, had some familiarity with Coach Jeff Howard, who's currently the Chargers linebackers coach, was the defensive backs coach during his time in Cleveland when he was coaching him. So I thought that one actually made a lot of sense. As far as Bryce Callahan goes, I know that I fully understand anybody's statements for why they would want to have him back. Like you said, familiarity with Staley's defense. He played well in the slot. I think that the Chargers are so high on Jasir Taylor right now. And if you watch what the Chargers have done just in terms of building out this cornerback group, they've been trying to get younger at the cornerback group as well. You go out and you select Jasir Taylor and Dean Leonard in the same draft, get a little bit of that more youth movement to mix in there with Asante Samuel Jr. and Michael Davis. And obviously you had that with JC Jackson as well. Unfortunately, that just didn't pan out as we all would have hoped. But I think that they're trying to get younger and faster at that corner position. And yes, obviously we're talking about a slot corner. So I'm not really sure where Essang Bassey is going to work into that, considering that Jasir Taylor right now is basically your starting nickel cornerback at that particular spot. But I would still think that eventually, probably not this week, but I would like to see the Chargers go out and get another bigger bodied corner. I don't know if Dean Leonard's ready for additional work. I know that he had some spurts in training camp where it looked good, but I don't think that he's fully ready for taking those type of outside responsibilities as of yet.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it feels like that. And, obviously Staley's honed in on his rotation now the last 2 weeks. And, I think it's improved. I don't know if you guys talked about this much, but I know I talked about it, how, when you have a, week 1 and 2, having kind of a 3 or 4 man rotation, you sometimes don't get that continuity, and you need to just like, okay, these are our starters. These are our guys. We're going to ride or die with it and build that chemistry. And it seems like it's, improved. And obviously, the maybe the level of competition has dropped off in terms of receivers. Obviously not in week 3 with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, but maybe certainly in week 4. I mean, Devontae Adams is great, but after that, it's, there's not much to get worried about in that Raiders offense outside of Devontae Adams and maybe a Josh Jacobs. But yeah, I'm interested to see if they will add a bigger body. I don't know if they will, just because, this was the week to do it. They added Bassey already, and that seems like they're probably good, barring another injury or anything like that. So I think this is the kind of group that we'll see, at least for the foreseeable future. As you alluded to, Jake, like that could change heading into the trade deadline. And if this team goes on a run and they feel like there's someone out there that can really help them, in the playoffs and beyond, then that could certainly change. But I think as of right now, this is the group that the Chargers will go with on the back end.
Yeah, in terms of that rotation that you mentioned, Ryan, because I didn't agree with that at all. The way how as heavy as Brandon Staley was rotating all his corners, because I thought if there was going to be any rotation, it would have just be limited to Asante Samuel Jr., Jasir Taylor, as far as what games, what particular spots of the game that you were going to be rotating them at that star position, because they're good at different things. And I thought if you were going to do a rotation, and we talked about that during the offseason, that I thought having two guys like that versatile in that particular spot, that could add a lot of dynamic to your back secondary. So I'm with you in terms of that rotation, and especially as it relates to JC and the rotation between him and Michael Davis that was happening, and in and out, trying to figure out where it was all going. It definitely didn't do anything to instill confidence and continuity and rhythm in that cornerback group. So I think by the time that we ended up getting to the Minnesota game, you had kind of established that. And then obviously the Raiders game came, even without having 3 of your starting safeties back there. It played better than it had the previous or the first 2 weeks of the season, in terms of you limit those explosive plays. They still happened, but you brought them down from where they were the first 2 weeks of the season. So I'm not sure. I mean, this is essentially now very similar to the cornerback group that you had last year, with JC Jackson no longer being here on this team anymore. And so how do you build off of that? And do you look to strengthen that before the trade deadline? Time will tell.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny. I think we cover USC also, and it's like the USC defense and the Chargers defense need to like start a breakfast club or something, because the explosive plays they both give up are eerily similar and equally frustrating. So, yeah. What do you want to get? Do you want to get to some other questions, or was there a certain topic that you wanted to dive into right now?
Let's get into some of the questions.
So we've had obviously some talk about that, but let's get to this one here. Cameron Burnett, do you guys feel like Herbo needs to take more ownership of the offense? Man is deadly while he's mobile. Whether he's on a boot or scrambling, we have too many 3 and outs for how athletic he is. I'll let you start.
I think you're already seeing his command of the offense, really, regardless of what you want to look at for the Raider game. I mean, look what he did in the Minnesota game. This is Kellen Moore and Justin Herbert just creating magic right here. This is them fully having a good understanding of what it is that they want to do in this offense. And if you want to look at the stats, hell, it's been talked about it in Dallas enough. Look at how much they've been struggling in the red zone this year, which we went through the stats all offseason in terms of what Dallas was when Kellen Moore was at the helm in terms of red zone production. They were at the top of that list. Now, the Chargers, one maybe not being at the top of the list, they have definitely significantly increased from where they were in the offense last year. So I think what you see from Justin Herbert thus far through these first 4 weeks is he has had a much better command of this offense. I think if you look at the Miami game, he didn't really need to be Superman because the running game was doing so well against Miami. So that may just be a little bit perspective of where that might be tapered down a little bit. Same thing with the Raider game, for example. There's obviously, if you want to call him being Superman, he did it with his legs in that game. The Chargers offensive line, unfortunately, was not doing him any favors in that game. So he had to scramble. He was under pressure constantly in that Raiders game. Minnesota essentially blitzed him for 58 minutes of the 60 minutes of that game. And he goes out and he throws for over 400 yards. So I'm not worried about Justin Herbert with Kellen Moore right now. I think these early 4-game indications of what they have partnered to do has been good. And just hopefully with a little bit of change in wide receiver with Mike Williams not being in there, I already really enjoyed seeing how Kellen Moore was going to attack that. You infuse a little bit more of Darius Davis in the run game. You even saw Justin Herbert trying to go to these other receivers. I know Quentin Johnston hasn't gotten the amount of reps that some people would like to have seen him do, or be at up until this point. But this is going to be a progression with him. But in no way do I think that Justin Herbert needs to have more command of this offense, because I think he already has it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. When you go 40 of 47 for 404 and a couple touchdowns, I think that tells you that you're understand the offense when the coordinator's not running the football and it's just like, we're just going to sling it all game long, even with the blitz coming in your face. So I think it's been exciting seeing how he has taken command. Obviously there was a lull there in that Raiders game last week, and I'm sure that's what a lot of people kind of allude to, but I think it's just going to keep growing, and this bye week's going to be really great, and seeing the maturation within this offense, what it looks like against, Kellen Moore's former team and the Cowboys, come prime time in a week. So, I don't think he needs to take any more command than he already has. I think that the chemistry is going to keep growing with the younger receivers. Obviously, we see the connection him and Keenan Allen have had throughout his whole career. It's stronger than ever this season, and Keenan Allen proving to everyone, it's so funny that the similarities between all of our LA football teams. You have the Rams, and everyone kind of forgot about Matthew Stafford, and they were calling him like, is his career done? Coming back from injury, he can't sling it anymore. And Matthew Stafford's looking like the best quarterback in the NFC. Like, absolutely. That's kind of the same with Keenan Allen. Like, had an injury riddled last year. Like, everyone forgot Keenan Allen's a top 10, arguably top 8 receiver in this league, and he's proving that yet again. And that connection with Herbert in this offense is just establishing and exploiting that even more. So if there's anything I do want to see, which you kind of alluded to, is not necessarily taking command of the offense, but it is building that rapport with other receivers, just to, I don't want to say take the pressure off Allen because he can handle it, but when you have those situations where defenses are going to key in on him more after he has, 18 catch games, there's going to be tighter boxes on him. There's going to be double teams on him. There's going to be safeties over the top. We need to see that connection with a QJ, with a Darius Davis. Palmer's been mixed in here and there, but will he be able to be more involved? Obviously with no Mike Williams. Hopefully we're getting Eckler back after the bye, but if not, are we able to use the backs more in the passing game in this offense? Because without Eckler, that really hasn't been a thing at all. So is Kelly or Spiller able to be more involved in the passing game? And then obviously with the tight ends, Donald Parham's a touchdown machine within 5 yards, but with his injury and with Gerald Everett, like, are they more involved in the intermediate stuff, between the 20s? So more of that stuff, not the Herbert taking command. I think he has full command of the offense. It's more of like, how are we going to get other guys involved besides the Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen show, I think.
Agreed.
So, but I do want to ask you this before we get to another question, because it's kind of on that topic. Have you been surprised that they've kind of gone away from the running game, after that week 1 explosion? Do you think that just shows how important Austin Eckler is to this running game, and they just don't quite have the dynamism with Joshua Kelly and Isaiah Spiller? Or do you just think because the passing game's working, that's what they've been sticking with?
I think it's a little bit of both. I don't necessarily want to say that they've gone away from the running game, but you look at like the Miami game, for example, if you just pigeonhole that, whatever you want to look at the final stat sheet for Justin Herbert, that was, to the untrained eye, for someone who didn't watch that game, you would look at that and you say, okay, Justin Herbert had a mediocre game, which is not the case. The running game was just dominant. And obviously that was when Eckler was playing, when Kelly was going off for good yardage. And then as we've seen over the last couple of weeks since Eckler has been out, the Chargers haven't had as much success as they did in week 1 in running the football, but there's a number of combinations for that. Minnesota was loading the box in that game. So basically they wanted to have Justin Herbert beat them. Not sure if that was the best strategy to go after.
Yeah.
A very interesting strategy to do that. And then you look at the Raiders game, and that was one of the more, that was one of the poor offensive line performances that you have seen, even from guys like Rashawn Slater, who I think had his worst game since he has been with this team. The Chargers, from the Trent standpoint, in terms of running the ball and passing protection, they were actually getting owned often. And for the fact that Justin Herbert was able to do what he did was remarkable. I even think if you were to just isolate it with some of the running backs, I think there were some runs from Kelly that he made that is just like, I understand that was the way that the play was designed. But as soon as it was going left, you just felt like, oh man, if you just like stopped on a dime, cut back and went to the right, there was just open field the entire other direction. And there was a few runs like that I've seen from Kelly where it's just, I don't think that he saw the field properly. The holes haven't opened up. And there's a lot of things that could go with that. Austin Eckler not being there, Corey Linsley obviously being out for a few of these games. That's going to change a little bit of the dynamic. So I don't necessarily think that they've gone away from the running game. I think that there's inopportune times on certain downs when it's 2nd and 10 and they choose to run the ball when that hasn't been working for them. That's for sure. And everybody who's talking about, oh, well, Justin Herbert shouldn't have tried the 4th and 1 conversion last week with a busted finger. Well, tell me. Your running backs tried it the week before in Minnesota, and that didn't get you anything. So the running game wasn't doing anything for you against the Las Vegas Raiders. So put the ball, broken finger or not, in the hands of your best player. So it's an interesting dynamic. But again, I think that the running game has already been better than it was last year. And I think it will continue to improve, obviously, with Austin Eckler expected to come back after the bye week.
It's I'm glad you brought up the 4th down play and Herbert with his finger, and it's such an interesting place to be as a coach. Not that I've been in that position, so I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I've made the decisions, but as a coach, obviously you want to protect your player, especially your star player, with play calling. However, if that player says, "Hey, I'm good," like I'm out there, you also don't want to then pigeonhole the play calls to tip the defense off, and B, is that going to hurt your team having him out there if you're only calling certain things? So it's such a weird kind of like decision making. Like obviously that's a very specific thing to have your quarterback in the pile doing that. But I'm always reminded of did you watch the show Quarterback on Netflix?
Yes.
So that I can't remember what episode it was, but when Mahomes hurt his ankle the first time and he's on the sideline and everyone thinks like, oh, and I'm not saying he's not, but everyone's like, okay, Andy Reid has total command of this team, and what he says goes. And there's that scene on the sideline where Mahomes just F no, you're not taking me out, you're not taking me out, you're not taking me out. And like sometimes people need to realize like, hey, these quarterbacks actually probably have a little more power than what we think, and probably even more power than the head coach, because A, they're making a lot more money, B, they're the face of the franchise. And if they say I'm not going out, it's pretty damn hard for that coach to say, okay, yeah, you're coming out. So I'm not saying that happened at all, but sometimes fans, we should think of that. Like, you know what, that could be Herbert saying like, let's do like, use me. Like I'm in this game for a reason. And I said, I'm good. Like, let's not utilize my skill set. So I just wanted to, I don't know if that's happened or not, but just another way to think about things. I saw there's a big uproar. Like, what is Staley doing? Like you're getting your quarterback's already hurt and you're putting him in these positions. And I get all that. And that's very true. But look at the other side of the coin where, the quarterback has a say as well.
Yeah. Agreed.
Let's see here. Let's see what the Ken says. Jake, the problem with the QB sneak is Herbert going high. He needs to go low, use the O-line's leverage and find a seam under all the chaos. It didn't work at the goal line. It didn't work later. Yeah. I always, you don't want to be in that scrum, but going high is almost more dangerous, especially with ball control. So you got to do the tush push, right? Got to get low leverage.
Hey, 3 teams tried that last week that were not named the Philadelphia Eagles, and every single one of them failed. And obviously the Chargers included in that conversation. So it's not as much of a cheat code as you think. It doesn't look like everybody else can just pull it off as easily as Philadelphia can. And which I agree with this point. I also would say, remember, this is not Corey Linsley in there. We found out very late in the week about his condition. So this was Will Clapp. And for the duration of the game, the offensive line was getting worked. You saw that at the goal line. You saw it during the game. You saw it in the running game. The amount of pressures that Justin Herbert was under having use his legs. And I get it. Anybody who's saying in terms of, possibly getting your quarterback injured and where Justin Herbert needs to go with the ball, I totally get all that. I think it was just the more of the point I was trying to say was, in the circumstance for the way that the game had gone up until that point, I still believe that was the right call for them to do. Everybody was saying, oh, you should have quarterback sneaked it in Minnesota. Okay, here you go. We'll do the tush push against the Raiders. And it still didn't work. Not knocking the play call, everybody's, I think, just knocking the result for the fact that they wouldn't get it. Because if they got it, we wouldn't be talking about it.
Yeah. Well, and with a 6'6" QB, like you would think you should get that.
Yes, you should get that. Yes.
Yeah. Did you see on Good Morning Football what they're trying to rename the tush push?
Oh, the brotherly shove.
Brotherly shove.
Yes.
I love that. I think that's great. So obviously it won't be what it's called here. It's funny. The Eagles are in LA this weekend playing the Rams. So we'll see the brotherly shove live and in person tomorrow. Okay. Another question here. Michael Peterson. Do we trust Alohi and Marlowe at safety, and then put Derwin in the box.
I mean, I thought Marlowe actually played a very, very nice game considering that you didn't have three safeties back there.
Yeah.
And with JT Woods obviously being out for the next few weeks as well with his IR designation, D Marlowe is going to see a lot more snaps. And yes, with a guy like Derwin James, I don't think that you can ever afford to not put him in different places around the field, just given his skill set. Put him in the box to stop the run, have him come off the edge to rush the passer if you need to. I know it doesn't happen as much as we would want to try to confuse defenses and give them some of those exotic packages. But I think that this is a situation where Marlowe was called upon last week with three safeties injured to go out and do his job, and he did. And so I think that's only going to infuse more trust from Brandon Staley and Derek Ansley moving forward. So it's the key word here is trust.
Mhm.
I don't know how frequently you would see Derwin in the box considering your situation at safety right now, but I would like to see a little bit more of these exotic blitz packages. I would like to see that. I would like to get out of strictly, playing man 80% of the time when you don't have a shutdown corner like that, or the infrequency of zone. You can confuse opposing offenses in different ways, just getting out of the base defense. So love to move Derwin James around a lot. I love it when he's coming off the edge or in the box to stop the run. I just don't know how frequently you could do it. So in terms of this question, would I trust these two on the snaps when it happens? Short answer is yeah, I'll say that, because if Derwin James is in the box at any point in time, I would hope that play is not going to be be an explosive play down the field. If he's coming off the edge to get to the quarterback, I would expect that ball to be out early and a short dump off, and whether it's complete or not, I would expect him to have some impact on that play.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say on it is, and you alluded to it, is if that's the case, it needs to be a disguised package. Like, it can't just be him lining up as like a backer, because that's a big tell for the offense. Like, oh, their best player is now 3 yards from the line of scrimmage. That's either going to be a blitz or whatever. Like, we're going to either get this out quick, or we're going to have something over the top wide open. So yeah, it's got to be some disguise look. So here's a interesting, fun, I don't know about fun, but hypothetical, original 1960. Do you guys see Joey Bosa as a trade asset with Thule and Mack playing great together?
No. If we're talking about this year, no, I don't. I think what you have right now in Tulipulotu is a great gift and an early indication that the Chargers got a home run with their second round pick. I
Yep.
love the fact that because Joey Bosa was not in this last game, that they literally did the exact same thing with Khalil Mack that they've been doing with Joey Bosa for the first 3 weeks, is where you put Thule on the inside, put Joey Bosa on the outside, and have them both rush from the same side. And look at the results that has gotten thus far.
Mhm.
It's just become unfair to whoever's standing on that side of the offensive line for the opposing team. So you get Joey Bosa back healthier after the bye week, I'm sure. Again, in my opinion, if you have a pass rush attack that is a lineup where it's Thule, with Bosa, with Mack, with Morgan Fox, with Rump, that should be sustainable, that you can get creative enough in how you get after the quarterback. So I know everybody's looking at this right now and saying, okay, everybody's high off of the Khalil Mack 6 sacks game, but
Mhm.
just look at the San Francisco 49ers, for example. Look how
Yeah.
loaded that defensive front is. I understand everybody's reservations in terms of Joey Bosa, always injured, but even injured, he played a handful of snaps in the Tennessee game and he had 2 sacks. Played a
Mhm.
handful of snaps in the Minnesota game, got pressures. I don't think that just looking at this from a standpoint of trade because of what Thule and Mack did last week is an accurate depiction of what they could possibly do for your defense. Regardless of what anybody wants to say in terms of Joey Bosa being injured, he's still one of the best run defenders in the league in terms
Mhm.
of setting the edge. So I would not deplete your defensive line when you're going to play much stronger offensive line here in the future and stronger running games. I would not deplete your defense in that circumstance. So in terms of this season, no, you ride with Joey Bosa.
100%. Couldn't agree more. So much in football is complementary, and how guys play complementary football with each other. And, we've seen those combinations, how well they are, and who's to say they'll be as good without one or without the other. And, I'll give myself a little pat on the back because, I watched Thule obviously all year at USC. And, I was saying all offseason, I know he was slated as edge, but I saw him more as a 3 to 5 tech inside of either Bosa or Mac. And that's what we've seen them have their most success when he lines up next to either Bosa or Mac more on the inside, as he just has that tactical bull rush with strength. And then the speed on the outside of Bosa and Mac then, forces and collapses the pocket. So, you don't want to mess that up. I mean, who's to say if you put him out as like a 9 tech on the very outside, he doesn't quite have that speed to do what Bosa can do when healthy. So it's complementary and they play so well together, and hopefully Bosa can get back fully healthy. I feel like we've been saying that for 5 years now, but we'll see if it happens. And but yeah, I just think you're finally kind of building a really strong defensive front that we haven't seen in quite some time. You have the pieces, and you just want to just keep that together. And there's no sense messing that up to try to go chase something else and get a situation like a JC Jackson, maybe where you chase something that didn't work. This is working. So don't mess that up. So I don't see it at all as a trade asset. This is a little bit back to what we were talking about before, Jake, but we can comment on it quickly. Michael Reichert, if I'm saying that right, Reichert. Do you think simplifying the coverages while Derwin is out is the move, or using more disguise?
This is an interesting question because I think that's exactly what happened during this Raiders game, is that it went back to more simplification of the defense. And I think it was very similar to, you go back to the Miami game of last year when Derwin wasn't playing and Jasir Taylor had his first start and Alohi Gilman made his big plays. There were so many question marks in that secondary. We all thought that, or everybody in the mainstream media thought that Miami was just going to light up the scoreboard against the Chargers. And no, it was actually one of the better game plans that Brandon Staley has put together since he has been the head coach of this football team. So yeah, I actually linked the Miami game of last year to a lot of what the defensive packages were against the Raiders this past week, just in terms of simplification. So yeah, with Derwin, as much as the chess piece that he is, that affords you to be more exotic in your defensive packages and what you're going to put out there to show quarterbacks in terms of what's coming, what's not coming. I personally think that I think that Derwin will be back for the Cowboys game this next week. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But if there are any type of lingering effects with him, yeah, I think it goes to more of a simplification of the defense.
Yeah, I agree. And that just, it lets everyone just focus on their singular job. And we've seen that them have success. Like, it's funny, Jake, how sometimes with how great Derwin James is, it's like sometimes the defense actually performs better with him not on the field, as strange as that is.
It's really weird.
So weird. And I think it is just like you said, it's simplified. It's, guys are able to say, okay, this is my singular job and I'm not reliant on the greatness of Derwin James to make a play. And I'm overthinking. And it's just like, okay, I have this quarters or I have this box or whatever it may be. And, you want them to get it right when Derwin's out there because he's arguably the best safety in football. And this defense should be better when he's on the field. So maybe they just need to simplify things when he's out there. Maybe they don't need to disguise anything, even with Derwin James. Just like, hey, let's just keep it simple, and we'll just use your skill set in a box almost, which is so. And I'm not saying we should do this, but is so anti what you do with unicorns like Derwin James. But maybe they need to do that. Like, hey, we're going to put you in a box because all this other stuff isn't really working. As weird as that is. So, all right, let's go one more question here, guys. Thanks for hanging out with us. Get some more questions in. And then, Jake, we can do a little maybe roundtable. But last question for now from Ken, and this is kind of going back to Bosa a little bit. But if you guys were the team's head coach, so put our Brandon Staley ball cap on, would you guys go back to Bosa playing towards 85% of snaps? Or would you limit his play time to, say, 60 to 65%? Seems he's much fresher at the end of games this way.
I think the way that Thule has obviously started, it does afford this coaching staff to give Bosa a break at times. I think how the Chargers have handled his injury and limited his snaps, because you've obviously seen what he's done in a limited amount of snaps, and the result has been good. But I think this is also a product of Brandon Staley saying, okay, he can play. We're not expecting it to, further the injury. He wants to play. So let's come up with this package. And as time goes on, the healthier he gets, his playing time is going to go back to what it normally was. But I do think that because of the way that Thule is playing right now, it does afford you those situations where you can give Bosa a breather. So I think it'll flex, honestly, between this percentage in terms, not just from Bosa's health, but if the play obviously continues of Thule, you'll find a good middle ground here to where you can have a nice rotation of these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the perfect situation is the more depth you have, the more rotation you can do to keep guys fresh is what you want to do. Like you see these star players, and obviously we want them out there in every play, but it behooves you if you have a good rotation. When you look, I know this is Chargers Unleashed. No one wants to hear about the Broncos, but when you look at that 2015 Broncos defense that won the Super Bowl, everyone remembers obviously Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware. But when you have guys like Shaq Barrett and other edge rushers that you can rotate in, guess what? In the fourth quarter against Tom Brady, you have a fresh Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware rushing instead of guys that have played 90% of snaps up to that point. So absolutely, you want to keep the rotation going, and that doesn't mean that's bad for Joey Bosa. He's not playing well. It just means you're keeping all players fresh, because when it comes against it in these last 2 weeks, we've seen it, and you got to have it. You need fresh legs out there and fresh bodies. So if the rotation's good enough, like, I don't care if he's fully healthy. I want him on a rotation, because when the game's on the line, and we've seen this Chargers team, as you mentioned, cardiac arrest, we never quite get a double digit victory with this team. So it's going to come down to a final possession. You want those guys fresh.
Very few and far between do those wins come.
Exactly. Let me ask you this before, if we get to more questions, and we can go as long or as little as you want, my man Jake. So I'll let you run the timing of this, but just kind of an overall arching question, because we haven't really talked about it. I'm sure you and Dan have, but team's sitting at 2-2, obviously improved from starting 0-2. But what's your barometer on this team? Do you feel like they're getting to where we expected them to be in the offseason, or are they still a long way off from what the expectation was?
I think it's getting there. I think when they started 0-2, when it came up to the Minnesota game, I take that back. I said that the Titans game was a must win for them, given just to get that taste out of their mouth and what happened with Miami. And obviously you had two AFC opponents right there that you couldn't afford in this conference to start falling behind like that. Chargers obviously didn't do that. Then when Minnesota came in, it was basically a do or die. You couldn't afford to go 0-3 in that game, and you were able to right the ship in that circumstance, albeit a nail biter to the very end for a variety of things that happened in that fourth quarter. Then with the Raiders game, obviously, no shortage of high blood pressure in that one as well. But hey, your defense has stepped up the past 2 weeks to secure some of those wins. And sometimes that's how it has to take place. Look at Patrick Mahomes in the Jets game. Statistically, when you look at Patrick Mahomes from a stat perspective, it does not look like where he would normally be during the first 4 weeks of the season. So sometimes you have these games. Quarterbacks will have bad games. Offenses will get stagnant, not be able to properly move the ball. And sometimes you need to rely on the other side of the ball to win you games. Sitting at 2-2, they definitely that was basically their goal after falling 0-2 to the Dolphins and the Titans at that point in time. Now, especially with the number of injuries that have taken place with the Chargers, the bye week couldn't have come soon enough, because you're going to get a slew of guys back, possibly Jalen Guyton back. We don't know.
Yep.
We'll wait to hear more updates on that. Maybe you get Jalen Guyton back for the Cowboys game. I particularly like this one because we have not talked about him at all, but Ryan, when Dan and I were at the Rock Solid Sports memorabilia signing right before week 1 of the season, Tito was there. Tito was one of the first guys that was up there to sign footballs. And as he was literally walking behind us and out the door, Dan Wolkenstein decided to shoot his shot. And as he was leaving, basically jokingly says like, "Hey, so we'll see you week 5, right?" And as Tito's leaving, he laughs back and kind of points, and just to kind of put that in the air, is that a reasonable time frame for him to return? So I think the Chargers had to get back to 2-2 with everything that has taken place. If you look back at the explosive plays they've given up, where they have struggled in certain situations, getting to 2-2 by any means necessary was the goal. Now you've got Dallas on the horizon. You've got Kansas City after that. So you now get 11 days to rest your guys. And with Kellen Moore and the way that he has been game planning these first 4 weeks, I actually really like. And to have him go back against Dallas, I'm excited for that from an offensive standpoint to see what they're going to do. Defense, hopefully you take this time to figure out what you need to improve on. You're going to have plenty of time to prepare. But this bye week in general, I know people don't like early bye weeks, but this bye week couldn't have come any better timing for the Chargers, honestly.
Yeah, it's perfect. I mean, it's crazy, Jake, how we have this conversation every year, but how already injured this team got in 4 weeks in star players. And
breaking news. Chargers are
wild.
injured.
Well, it's one of those two that unless it gets talked about nationally, and I don't, and again, this is the NFL, there's no excuses, it's next man up. But as we've learned, like injuries do play a role. And I remember talking to people and like, man, Chargers barely beat that terrible Raiders team. And regardless, the Chargers should have won more. But when you figure the starters that were out in that game, like it's just unreal. The firepower that they were already missing in week 4. And so I was from the ilk of like, I was impressed of what they've been able to overcome. And so that's why I'm very optimistic about where this team is at 2-2. And they're still not where they need to be. They're still not where they want to be. Obviously the coaching staff and the players would say that, but when you start a season as rough as they did, 0-2, and you have all these expectations coming in, you have the bad taste of Jacksonville the year prior, the weight of the world in Los Angeles, still trying to kind of get their true footing in this city. And then it just comes crashing down in those 2 weeks. Like you could easily pack it in and really look dismal. And even in that Minnesota game, how that was such a back and forth game and what a wild fourth quarter that was. I've notably been a pretty staunch Staley supporter. But obviously starting over in 2 is like, this isn't going to fly. And, you got to make changes here soon if this continues. So the way they've rebounded in those sense and getting back to 500 and kind of getting a fresh start coming off the bye. I think this team's definitely in the right direction. And when you have someone like Herbert that's just going to get stronger and stronger in this offense, and as you mentioned, a guy like Kellen Moore now that has 14 days to game plan against his former team, against a defense that he knows very well, going against that defense, that Dan Quinn defense every day in practice. I'm excited to see the direction of this team, and I think it pose a real threat to the NFL now moving forward. Because I'll be honest, Jink, like I don't think we've seen a true dominant team in the NFL this year. Like there's been times Miami's looked the part and then they get blown out last week against Buffalo. There's been time Buffalo looks the part and then they lose a bad game. There's been times the Chiefs are the Chiefs, but they barely beat the Jets. They lose the Lions. And so there's really this pecking order of like, who's going to take the top, and the Chargers at 500 absolutely can get there. Now they're not there yet and they have a ways to go. And this defense needs to continue to get better, but it's, I think they're in a good spot moving forward. And at least we're seeing progression from week in and week out a little bit. I think we maybe a little regression in offense last week, but the defense kind of progressed. So we just need to see you put it all together for 4 quarters to see what this team can really do.
Yeah. Yet to see that yet.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you think? Any final questions in here, guys? And we can wrap up unless there's something else you want to dive into, Mr. Hefner.
We talked about there it is. See,
Thanks,
you have a fan base endorsement now, Ryan. There you go. Something to build on for sure. We talked about Justin Herbert. We talked about obviously the JC Jackson situation. What that means for the secondary. Talked a little bit about the defensive line. Talked about the running game a little bit. I would like to just say in terms of, general assessment of the team now, how about if you just got into more what's been the highs and the lows, maybe just from the team or the players themselves. If you want to highlight one individual who has shut a majority of this fan base up for the last 3 weeks is Kenneth Murray.
Yeah.
Kenneth Murray, since he has had the green dot on his helmet, which I am very glad that Brandon Staley chose to keep that on him when Eric Kendricks even returned this past week. Kenneth Murray has looked very, very good. Very good. And we need to give him his credit for that, especially for it being a contract year for him. We all thought that Eric Kendricks being back in that backfield could benefit with him as that starting pair. Jeff Howard, the linebackers coach of this team, has said, I don't want one-star linebacker. I want 2. And so the emphasis has obviously been there for a lot of improvement to get out of this linebacker group. And even with Deion Henley not playing a majority of snaps, which everybody thought that was going to be the case, he's been more limited to special teams, hasn't played much coming off of his hamstring injury, but Kenneth Murray has held the middle of the field down. And I personally love the fact that he was in the same package, which coincidentally enough, when he rushed Aiden O'Connell and put Josh Jacobs back on skates right back into him, that almost was able to get him down. Brian, that's the same play that Kenneth Murray accidentally took down Justin Herbert in training camp when he came through on that type of a blitz and didn't stop and unfortunately knocked Justin Herbert down. So you do have to, it's a no, but you have to credit the play of Kenneth Murray these past 3 weeks for sure.
Yeah, that's a great highlight. And, probably one of the most beleaguered players among the fan base. Just, obviously with the hype and being a first round pick. So it's, this coaching staff has believed in him, right or wrong or indifferent, and to the chagrin of most fans, but they've stuck with him. And I think it's finally, we're seeing it pay off. So, hats off to that young man, and excited to see how he continues to progress. And hopefully, him and Murray him and Kendricks can actually get some real consistent playing time, because there's another injury that obviously reared its ugly head early on. So hopefully they can get some consistency together, and we'll see that unit become even better moving forward. So this question real quick, you think a trade for a tight end, Pitts, Darren Waller? I don't, but I'll let you answer.
I don't. I understand why this question has been floated out there, because Kyle Pitts essentially isn't even being utilized in Arizona, or excuse me, in Atlanta still.
Mhm.
It's amazing to say that sentence. I feel like that's 2 years ago and we're still saying that same sentence, which is really weird.
Well,
And then Darren,
they have him and Drake London, and they're just like invisible, like two of the best pass catchers in football. They're just like invisible. But that's an Arthur Smith offense. It shouldn't be surprising to people that know Arthur Smith.
but you would still think for Arthur Smith, who came from Tennessee, that you would be utilizing your tight ends a lot more. And still with
Yeah.
Kyle Pitts, that has not happened yet. And with Darren Waller, when he's healthy,
Yeah,
that's enticing, but he's injured a lot.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
no,
for me, it's simple in the fact that Kellen Moore can get a lot out of not big name tight ends. And, you don't always want to just look at history, but you see what he did in Dallas with the tight end group there. And that, they never had like a marquee tight end, but they were, utilized, and obviously in that scheme played very well. So I would love to see Gerald Everett utilized more in this offense. And that kind of goes back to what we talked about in the very beginning, Jake, is, if Herbert needs to rely less on Keenan Allen and start utilizing more. Cause I mean, there's even been talk of, Quentin Johnson. I know hasn't been involved, but he's been in a lot of plays where he's actually gotten open and Herbert just didn't throw to him. So is it, and I'm not blaming Herbert at all, but is it more of a trust thing, or just the connection that he has with Keenan and he needs to get off that? Because we're seeing actually other players in this offense get open, get separation. They're just not getting the ball in their hands. And as long as this offense moves the ball and wins, who cares? But there's going to be those times when they're going to have to do that. And, we've seen it time and time again. So I think that's more where, I don't think they need a trade, because they have an arsenal of tight ends I think that can play in this system. It's just more of, getting them the ball more, and that'll show fans that they have the right guys.
Dan and I had talked about it. When Mike Williams went down with the injury, no one person is going to replace the production of Mike Williams. So you have to figure out the rest of the guys offensively, whether we're talking wide receiver, running back, tight end here. A collection of guys is going to have to make up that production. So yes, with you, I think that it obviously was good news that we got with Donald Parham, that it obviously wasn't a break. It was a sprain. Hopefully that doesn't keep him out too long. But Gerald Everett, for some reason, has become a bulldozer in the limited amount of targets that he has gotten, because he's all of a sudden just breaking tackles whenever he gets the ball. So yes, I would like to see more utilization of him. I would like to see more utilization of both Everett and Parham in between the 20s, and not when it just comes down to the red zone. Quentin Johnston, in terms of what everybody's saying about it right now, look, it is way too early to even try to put a bust label on this, because of the limited amount of snaps that he was playing when Mike Williams was in this lineup. And if I had to ask you right now, if you were Justin Herbert and it was a third down play, who are you trusting to get the conversion? Is it Keenan Allen, or is it somebody else? Keenan Allen or the field? And I've said it plenty of times on this show that I know Justin Herbert can sometimes get a little bit too Keenan Allen happy. Sometimes he'll throw it to him when he's double covered. But that just shows you how much trust that he has in Keenan Allen. I think now what Kellen Moore is going to have to help instill that in this offense is to say, look, even Trent Green brought this up on the broadcast, Ryan, when we were talking about the Raiders game. He was even saying, now we need to utilize the entirety of the field. And the Chargers need to do that moving forward with the likes of Quentin Johnston, with Darius Davis, with Gerald Everett, with Joshua Palmer. All these guys are going to have to step up to make up that lost production in Mike Williams.
Yeah, absolutely. And, final point of that, and this isn't just a Justin Herbert thing. This is a NFL quarterback thing. Like you find your guy and you kind of key in on him. We see it across town with the Rams. And I said this on our Rams show, not to turn this to a different team, but as weird as this sounds, the best thing for this Rams team was the fact that Cooper Kupp went on IR at the beginning of the year, because it forced Stafford to build a rapport with the likes of Puka Nacua, with Tutu Atwell, with these other guys. Now you get Kupp back, and you just have you have the whole playbook at your arsenal because Stafford's built that. And if you look at Stafford in years past, he would only throw the ball to Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp had games where he had like 30 targets, and it would only go to Cooper Kupp, especially last year. But even in that Super Bowl run, when they had Robert Woods, he wasn't utilized. When they had OBJ, he wasn't utilized because it was Stafford to Kupp. And that was part of the reason why I won the Triple Crown. He's a great receiver. So I'm not at all saying I want Keenan Allen to go on IR or anything. So don't hear me that way. But sometimes this isn't just a Justin Herbert thing. This is an NFL quarterback thing where you build a rapport. That's your trust. How do you shift that? How do you change that? Honestly, it's going to just take one big play. 3rd and 10, like you mentioned, Jake. QJ gets open. Herbert hits him. He makes the play. All of a sudden, that light bulb goes on. I'm like, okay, that's now another guy I can utilize because he's proved it to me.
Exactly.
And so I think that's what it takes.
I mean, hey, if you want to look at anything from the bright side, Quentin Johnston was integral in helping keep a drive alive for the Chargers on the 3rd and 18 100%. Houdini play that Justin Herbert had to get out of a sack, roll out, and throw downfield. And Quentin Johnston made a great catch stretching out for the ball. I'm seeing a little bit of discourse here in the chat just in terms of saying is like, oh, he's drafted in round 1, needs some time to develop. Oh, if you're drafting a wide receiver in round 1, you shouldn't have time to develop. Look, you draft a wide receiver for this team. Quentin Johnston was never, ever the expectation to come in and be wide receiver 1 from the jump with this team. We're not talking about a Stephon Diggs. We're not talking about a Justin Jefferson here. You still have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams on this team when he was drafted. There was never the expectation that he was going to come in and blow the roof off of this offense. So whether it needs more time for him to develop because of the guys who were ahead of him, or just in terms of building that rapport with Justin Herbert, which he's going to get plenty of opportunity to do now, there should not be these sky-high expectations when you still had the wide receivers in this room when he was taken. Am I saying that am I trying to give him an out here? No. Am I saying that this is going to be a year for him to develop? Possibly, but his playing career now is going to be greatly accelerated, and he's going to be expected to step up. So one game with a much bigger snaps than he had the first 3 weeks, that's step 1. Hopefully you can continue to build on that week in and week out through the duration of the season, and hopefully that yields results. But 4 weeks in, considering that he did not play much through the first 3 weeks, and you isolate this to the Raiders game, which there was a multitude of things taking place offensively for this team, you got to give it more time than that. You have to give it more time than that.
Yeah, and what I would just say is, it's so hard to compare situationally, right? Like I've seen like Zay Flower mentioned, and Zay Flowers, could have been great in this offense, absolutely, but he's also in a situation where was basically drafted into a prominent role just because of the lack of receiving talent. I know they signed OBJ, but he's been banged up and injured. And so Jordan Addison goes to Minnesota where he's already wide receiver 2 and is very skill set similar to what they use in Justin Jefferson. So every situation is different. Like you don't know how it plays out in your certain organization or your system. But then the other thing I'll say is, guys like Justin Jefferson, they're unicorns. How many first round receivers do we see drafted that don't take off in year 1? I think it's way more consistent in that than the latter. I mean, Justin Jefferson's a unicorn. I'm trying to think of others off the top of my head, but very few.
How about one of the worst wide receiver groups ever taken in the first round?
I know where you're going.
Craig Buster Davis, who was on the Chargers, Dwayne Bowe, and then a guy who originally was drafted by the Saints, but then became a part of the Chargers roster, Robert Meacham. Those were 3 guys that were first round wide receiver talents. You have situations like this. It's all about coaching, development, and obviously overall expectations. You got to give it more time than 4 weeks on a limited snap count thus far. You have to do that.
100%. So I'm not worried at all. I think that he's in a good spot where, and I think, you never, ever root for injuries, and not that we would. And obviously, Mike Williams going down hurts this team substantially. But if we're looking at a silver lining, like this could be a good thing for QJ's development, because now it, as you alluded to, it forces him into a more prominent role. that he's going to be forced to be more involved than he would have been before. So sometimes you need that little bump, right? In any job or in any life situation where it's all of a sudden you're relied on a little more. It's going to force you to, put in a little extra work, do a little more homework, little film study, because, my team's going to rely on me. So I have complete faith he'll be completely fine. And again, it's 4 weeks, guys. Like, come on, 4 weeks. Like, let's say get this guy a break here. So what do you think, Jake? Any more questions, or do you want to wrap this thing up?
We got the last 5 minutes. Let's try and take as many questions as we can before we wrap up.
All right, so let me go through here. See, great conversation. How much for Sertan? I mean, you'll never see an in-division trade, so that'll never happen. But I like the thought process there. A lot of this is a fun convo about the receivers. So, guys, any final questions? Go ahead and drop them in here. Yes. Stephen Rutledge, the hope is Guyton will be back after the bye. I don't think it's confirmed, right, Jake? It's just it's looking likely.
Hopefully. I mean, those little indications that Staley gave last week during his press conference was basically just saying he's progressing. Look, you're never going to get straight expectations and the answers that you're looking for, the yes or no's from this organization. That's never happened. Whether we're talking contract negotiations, whether we're talking injuries, they always play things very close to the chest, and they will not give anybody any indication of anything otherwise. So as long as Brandon Staley can hold the news that Jalen Guyton is going to be back, if that is exactly what's going to happen before the Dallas game, he's going to keep that as long as he can. Until he actually sets foot on the practice field and is out there taking reps for all the other reporters to see, we'll know. We'll know, essentially.
Yeah. It's crazy, Jake. Like, even with how coy and close to the vest the Chargers are with injuries, like me, covering USC extensively, like college is even crazier. Like, literally last week, Jake, we show up. I went to Boulder for the USC Colorado game, and we're on the field pregame because, with having credentials, able to go down there. And finding out an hour before the game that Zachariah Branch and Max Williams, 2 starters, are not dressing out. Like, you just don't know anything in the college game. So even how little Brandon Staley and the Chargers will tell us, it's still a lot more than what you get in college. So I'll just throw that out there. Question here. I saw it. Now I lost it. Marcus, what's the future at center? Obviously, with Lindsey having this kind of heart scare, and you never know exactly the depth and the, all we can do is pray and hope he's all good. Being a father of someone with a heart issue, it's never take that stuff lightly. But with Will Clapp, coming in, Jake, what do you think? Is this a move that they need to start addressing and looking towards, or?
I mean, I think it is, and you obviously hope for the best with Corey Linsley. You hope that everything ends up being okay for him health wise. You hope that you could actually get him back if everything checks out after this 4-game stint. Time will obviously tell on that. Will Clapp, believe it or not, as much as we wanted to highlight how big of a loss that would be, he was the best performing offensive lineman this last week against the Raiders, if you look at that statistically in terms of pressures given up. So I think you can build off of this. Again, I think it is a thing with continuity here, because when you take out the center, you take out any offensive lineman, there is going to be a little bit of an adjustment period. And for guys like Zion Johnson and Jamari Sawyer, who are playing 2 different positions than what they played last year, when they have a guy like Corey Linsley, who's normally in between them, your play is generally going to be better when you have a caliber player like that playing under center. Now, with any offensive lineman that loses a guy here, loses a guy there is always continuity that basically has to rebuild every single time that happens. So hopefully this is what you can do with Will Clapp during this bye week, whatever reps it is that you're talking about taking, because you're going up against one of the better defensive fronts in the league next Monday. So you're going to have to be prepared for it. But Will Clapp, I think, in terms of holding it down, I think that they will get that continuity down. You'll be able to, get those guys gelling together and get a lot better production as an offensive line as a whole moving forward. But yeah, this is going to have to be, I think that this, is a little bit of an eyebrow raise, a little bit of a shot across the bow that the Chargers may want to start investing in this position moving forward.
Yeah. And still the best meme in all the NFL. Will Clapp, that is. So last couple here, rapid fire. Eddie Dale Jr., what level does Jasir need to play at to be a starter for us next year?
Well, right now he's a starter for the team this year. And this obviously started from the Miami game last year for him in terms of his increased role through the rest of last season, how it's obviously come about this year. It obviously didn't start that way for Jasir Taylor because you had JC Jackson on this team at that point. That shuffled things around defensively a lot. I think this team is extremely high on Jasir Taylor. And I'm talking in terms of when you listen to the coaching staff talk about him. Now, let's not forget, this is a guy who's in early part of his second year, was a former 6th-round pick, and there is still going to be some development and some growing pains for him to get through. But you would obviously hope that with the expectations and all the reports very early before training camp, basically saying, go ahead and pencil Jasir Taylor in at the star spot. There was obviously something there. There was a level of confidence there. There was a big reason why they felt that he could do that. And that is because his skill set with Asante Samuel Jr. between playing the man, playing run, it's a little bit different, interchangeable between them. So you hope in the areas where Jasir Taylor can improve that he's able to put all that together by the time that we end this season. And you can really justify that to say, okay, yes, that's locked in, because corner is going to be a priority for the Chargers in the offseason, whether that's through free agency or the draft. It has to be, considering that Asante Samuel Jr. is coming up for contract. Same thing with Michael Davis. So you're going to have to, obviously that this secondary is not going to look the same over these next couple of years. So you have to start investing in that now. But Jasir Taylor, if he could start putting together these little things that we knew that he struggled on last year, what he struggled in a bit this year, if he can put all that together as it relates to the run game, that's where I think is probably the biggest hurdle for him to get over. If you could put all that together by the end of this season and say that this came together as a whole for him, then yeah, I could say that you could pencil him in as your starter moving forward, but that would have to happen.
Yep. Totally agree. So, all right, last couple here, guys. Thanks so much for hanging out with us on Chargers Unleashed on this beautiful Saturday morning in Los Angeles. Zach Tracy, do you think Darius Davis will turn into our Tyreek Hill after seeing his big run last week and how versatile he can be? I will quickly just say, I'd love to see him in that role. I think it's a little unfair to put that expectation on him, being a 4-game rookie, but obviously has the speed to be utilized in a similar type role. But I'll let you answer, Jake.
Yeah, look, nobody is Tyreek Hill, obviously. I think it's more so how you want to talk about how he's infusing the offense, much in the way that Andy Reid used him when he was in Kansas City and what Mike McDaniel is doing now against the Dolphins. Hell, not even with Darius Davis. You're seeing Keenan Allen run these similar type of routes in the backfield and just covering as much ground. They literally just run around Justin Herbert and then come back around to the other side. Just they're never really getting the ball in those circumstances. But to see Darius Davis already infused like he was last week against the Raiders and having his 51-yard run, it just shows you the type of home run capability that this guy has. And we're not talking about special teams here. We're talking about in an offense. So much like we were talking about earlier, how do you replace the production of Mike Williams? This is on Kellen Moore to get creative, to say, look, this is why we drafted 2 wide receivers with these type of skill sets in this past draft. Let's use them. Let's use the tight ends. You're going to have a full complement of your offense. So I think that Kellen Moore is fully aware of that. I think he's prepared for that. And you're going to see a bigger role for both Darius Davis and Quentin Johnston moving forward, because you're going to have to. Because Keenan Allen is definitely going to be commanding the double teams from here on out with Mike Williams out of this lineup. So these other guys are going to get single coverage. If they're free, Justin Herbert's going to have to see him when they're open. And obviously when the ball comes to them, catch it, make a play, do something with it. So I wouldn't say Darius Davis, Tyreek Hill expectations, but in terms of explosive plays that he could bring to this offense, I think there's definitely potential there.
Absolutely. Can't wait to see him get more involved. I think that was the excitement was, yes, special teams was a perfect fit, but if they can really utilize him in this offense and his skill set, it's only going to benefit this entire team. So with that, Jake, I think we can wrap up. Any final thoughts as we close out this live edition of Chargers?
No, this was good. Again, we have a Sunday where we don't have to worry about a Chargers game as much as I know everybody would like to watch one. We could just take a deep breath this week and just enjoy a weekend of college football, of NFL football, and gear up for a big game with the Dallas Cowboys next Monday. That's going to be a fun one. It's going to be a tough fought game, that is for sure. And you would hope that after this time of getting some guys back from injury, good time to prepare for the game that the Chargers can obviously secure a win after that one. But Ryan, thanks so much for stepping in. I know obviously with Dan being on vacation, still wanted to kind of take this bye week to get a pulse on how everybody's feeling after the first 4 weeks. But appreciate you, man. Appreciate everybody in the comments, obviously, for jumping in. Jake Hefner and Ryan Dyrud here from the LA Football Network. We will see you guys next time on Chargers Unleashed.